Don't miss today's Hot Zone. We're in Las Vegas, Nevada, and we're talking about homelessness.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. We are driving around Las Vegas, Nevada, and kind of my old stomping grounds, actually. My parents actually were married here, met here, grew up here, and so I spent a lot of time here as a kid. My grandparents used to live here and everything. Everybody's gone now pretty much, but I've been down here today reporting on the homelessness crisis and how Las Vegas is trying to deal with that. And this is going to be a two-part series, I think, because I've got so much good stuff today that it's too much for one podcast, but we'll see. Nevertheless, I'm first want to introduce you to a guy who was a homeless man who spent 17 years on the streets and now has been clean. He's gotten married, and he's got an amazing life. And I want you to hear him tell you why and how he fixed his life. Listen to this.
Well, I was on the streets for 17 years in San Diego and here in Las Vegas for 12 years. And there was a gentleman by the name of Joe Lupo. He used to see me a lot in the downtown area, and he would help me out with a couple bucks and buy me a cup of noodle soup and a cup of coffee. And he would always tell me that there's a place where I can go to get some help. And he did this for like 2 or 3 years. And each time he told me there's a place where I can go, I would always say, no, I don't want to go there. And it wasn't until he did take me up to the rescue mission at one point in time, the Las Vegas Rescue Mission. It's a Christ-centered 12-step program. And when I saw the crosses and saw that it was about Jesus, I told him, I can't do a program like this because I didn't want anything to do with the Lord at that time. So I told him, no, I can't do this kind of program. And I'll never forget it, because anybody else would have said, you know what? After 2 or 3 years, this guy is never going to get it together. He's never going to get any help. But Joe didn't, the Holy Spirit and God told him that there was something about me that he needed to go above and beyond, and he did. And when I told him I didn't want to do the program, he gave me a couple bucks and said, well, call me when you're ready. And it's pretty crazy, because after I didn't go to the rescue mission, I started having the worst time ever. In 17 years of being on the streets, I started having the worst time ever on the streets. The cops were always picking me up and taking me to jail. The security guards at the Fremont Street Experience wouldn't even let me within a block of the area where I used to make money. There was one time I woke up with no shoes, another time I woke up with one shoe. And so I just finally just said, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I need to get some help. And I called Joe, and he came and picked me up, and he took me to the rescue mission, where I gave my life to the Lord.
What led to you becoming homeless to begin with?
Well, my dad wasn't around. My mom was drinking a lot, and I was bullied in school. So I started hanging around the wrong crowd. That's usually what happens. They were smoking cigarettes and smoking weed, but they were willing to accept me. So that when I started hanging around that crowd, that's when I started getting into trouble. I would start skipping school, and then one time I wanted to get away from my mom, so I stole her car, and I actually took her car across 3 county lines on a high-speed chase. And when the car finally overheated, the cops pulled me out of the car, and they had all their guns drawn, and they were saying, he's just a kid, he's just a kid. And the thing is, every time the cops would try to pass me, I'd swerve and knock them off the road. So I ended up putting a couple cops in the hospital and damaging a bunch of cop cars. And so I got sentenced to Eldora for that until the age of 18. But when I got to Eldora, I was a really good kid. And then they let me out early. And then when I got out of there, I started hanging around some guys in North Omaha, where we started burglarizing houses in Iowa. And then I got gun charges for that one, and then I spent the rest of my time in Kearney, Nebraska. Both are boys' institutions for criminals. So before the age of 18, I'd already committed over 20 felonies. And then when I got out of Kearney, I actually tried to get my life together. I got married for a little while. I had a job. I was in charge of shipping and receiving at Asher Distributing. But then I started hanging out in my basement, smoking weed and drinking Cisco. And then my wife ended up leaving me. And then that's when I started doing the meth. And everything went straight downhill from there.
Explain to me that feeling you were talking about. What's that like, and what did it do to you?
The worst part was the first time that I shot up. I can't even explain it. The minute it hit me, I just wanted to feel that way for the rest of my life. It just took everything away. I didn't feel any pain. I felt good. I felt like I felt like nothing could hurt me. And the minute I shot that dope up, I said, I want to feel this way for the rest of my life. And I just continued to chase that for the rest of my life. Every time I'd come down from it, I didn't like what I saw. I didn't like the way I felt. And I would do anything and everything I can to get that feeling again. And the worst problem is that you got to have more and more and more each and every time. So you just start chasing it. You get to a point to where you won't even go to sleep until you have enough to wake up in the morning so that you can wake up feeling good. So it starts with hurt in your life and a lot of pain. And then you realize that this can make you feel so good that you just don't feel any of it. And then you chase that from there on out.
How many years did you spend on the streets here in Vegas? And tell me what it's like for the people who live on the streets here.
Well, I was homeless in San Diego for 4 years and homeless in Las Vegas here for 12 years. So it was 17 years nonstop. I was even homeless a little bit in Iowa, where I was from, before I took off to San Diego. But so I was homeless for 17 years, the whole time doing drugs. And life on the street, I was medicated, so it didn't really bother me, none at all. But I can tell you from experience, life on the street is not fun. You get a lot of rejection. You get told you can't be here, you can't do there. Everybody walks by you and just treats you like crap most of the time. So I was medicated, so it really didn't bother me. But life on the streets can be really rough, especially in the cold months. And the rejection and the feeling like you're not human. And then you're doing drugs, it'll slowly but surely turn into mental illness after a while. As a matter of fact, I was out there, I'd be in dumpsters, I'd be throwing stuff around, yelling at people. And the reason being is because I felt like, well, nobody cares about me. Why should I care about anybody else? You know, and I would just make a mess on purpose just because, you know, and I was in trash cans on the Fremont Street Experience, yelling at people and screaming at people. And whenever they wouldn't give me money, I'd start yelling and screaming at them. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people thought I was mentally ill, and I was. And I think even without drugs and alcohol in the mix, it could really have an impact on your life. And so the chronically homeless, obviously, a lot of people see the big messes everywhere, and that's because they just don't care. They've lost the reason to even care. So, and then it just gets that way.
On January 1st, a new city ordinance went into effect here in Las Vegas that makes it a crime to sleep on the streets if there are beds available in shelters around the city. Here's the problem with that. At any given night, there are probably 5,000 people or more sleeping on the streets, and there are only 2,000 beds here in the city. But this is just an attempt to make it more difficult for people to be homeless in Las Vegas and not incentivize being homeless and sleeping on the streets. In the long run, it probably helps people by making it less likely that they're going to have that kind of miserable existence. But here's the bigger problem. What that does is it causes more and more people to move into tunnels like these behind me underground, and some say right now there are already over 1,000 people. There's a small town living underneath the streets of Las Vegas.
The homeless population in Vegas and in San Diego, because of the good weather, there's a lot of homeless here. So what the city of Las Vegas decided to do was to make it against the law to sleep on the streets if there's room in the shelters. And I understand what they're trying to do. In my opinion, I just think they went about it the wrong way. To make it against the law just sounds really bad, like you got to go here or you're going to jail. Obviously, that is criminalizing homelessness. They could have went about it a different way. I understand they were trying to get people off the streets and into the courtyard, but there's a way to go about it without saying, you know, you're going to go to jail if you don't. So there is a problem here in Vegas, and everybody was sleeping out in tents, and there was a lot of food going down there. There was one time somebody brought some honey down there, and it ended up in the streets, and there were bees and rats everywhere, all over the streets. So they had to do something to get it cleaned up. And I know the city was asking a lot nonprofits, what can we do to get them off the streets and into the shelters? And the biggest thing was, if you've had a couple beers, or if you have mental issues, or if you're a couple, or if you have an animal, you can't go into the shelters because they don't allow those things there. So at the courtyard, they allow those things into the courtyard now.
The trash cans where the residents can lock all their stuff up. And underneath that little area right there is where all the homeless sleep right now. And then sooner or later, all this is going to be probably a shelter for the city of Las Vegas. I think they bought all this land for that.
So that you can go in there, regardless of whether you've been drinking or whether you're high or whether you have an animal, you can bring them in there. And they give you a mat and a blanket, and right now it's sleeping underneath the carport. They're supposed to build a regular shelter there by the year 2022. But as of right now, it's just an outdoor area where they camp outside.
So tell me about your outreach and how that got started.
So 2X Ministries got started. The Lord put it on my heart. He said, I want you to go back out to the same streets you came from and tell people what I've done for you. Because when I gave my life to the Lord, everything changed. I didn't want to do drugs anymore. I didn't want to drink anymore. I quit cussing. I quit smoking. It was a radical life change. And I just wanted other people on the streets to know that if you need help, that there is help out there, and it's through Jesus Christ that can help you. Whether you're on drugs or not, Jesus is the answer. I believe it's always the answer. So he put that on my heart, and then he also told me that he wanted me to do the same thing for other homeless people that Joe did for me. And I kind of had an issue with that because Joe gave me his phone number to call him if I wanted to get some help. And so I said, Lord, you want me to give out my phone number to homeless people so they can call me if they want to get some help? And so that's what we started doing. So what we do is we hit the streets like 3 or 4 times a month. We go to different areas of Las Vegas. We provide care packages. We have seasonal items, blankets. In the summertime, we have sunscreen, electrolytes. We pass out water, care packages, socks. And then, so we provide for them. And then I also tell them, listen, if you want some information on how to get off the streets, whether it's a housing assessment or ID or a birth certificate, or if you need help with drug and alcohol issues, or if you want information on sober living, call me and I will get you that information. And in a lot of cases, I will even go get them, pick them up, and take them to the rescue mission or to the Salvation Army or wherever they need help. So on business cards, I actually hand them a business card with my cell phone number on there so they can call me if they want to get some information on how to get off the streets. Every single month, I think we get about 3 or 4 people off the streets. We've even taken a couple of people into our own home. Every month, the Nevada Homeless Alliance has a pop-up outreach where they provide birth certificates, ID, and housing assessments. So I print those flyers out, and then I give them to the people on the street so they know where to go so they can get some help. But
explain that. What is it that people need that those people are providing?
Housing assessments, definitely. There is housing available, but you have to call them every month to stay on the list. If you don't call them, then you get taken off the list. But if you're disabled or have a small income, you would qualify for housing. If you have children, definitely. If you're elderly, even if you're just homeless, you can qualify for housing. So that's where the housing assessments come in.
So tell me about your dream then, what you'd like to do.
I'd like to provide more housing for the homeless. I believe in the concept of tiny homes. I believe if someone has their own home and their own area that they can call their own, that'll give them a sense of hope. Like, you know what, this doesn't happen all the time. I'm going to use this opportunity to get my life on track and do what I need to do. And it gives them a sense of a future. And it could work for the mentally ill also, because we have to remember the mentally ill run the streets as long as they're not hurting themselves or someone else. And there are no resources for those. There's only one sober home for the mentally ill, and obviously that's always full. So if you have a tiny home community and you give a mentally ill person their own little place, as long as they can keep it clean, obviously they would be happy with that as long as they weren't around other people. A lot of the mentally ill cannot be in a dorm style place because they just can't deal with that. If they have their own little place and willing to keep it clean, like I said, we can get the mentally ill people off the streets. And of course, it'd have to be, security there or whatever, but it's a lot better than them running the streets. Yeah, and maybe even if they get off the streets and get whatever they're dealing with on their medication, then maybe they can get into a more permanent setting and into their own apartment. Obviously, if they stay on the streets and deal with the rejection and the moving around, obviously they're just going to get more and more mad at the world, and then the mentally, it really sinks in bad. So,
What's the biggest? What are the biggest obstacles to you realizing this?
well, I mean, we had a piece of land that was donated to us. It was about a little under an acre of land, and we tried to put tiny homes on there, but the county said there's no zoning for tiny homes, and plus it was right next to a residential area. So they said we'd have to spend about $10,000 to get everything rezoned. And then, of course, if one neighbor says we don't want this here because it is homeless people, then they would probably deny the thing. So our biggest setback has been, number one, a property in like a commercial area, and then number two, the funds to put tiny homes on there. If we had the funds and the land to do it, I'd be more than happy to manage it and get people out the streets. The goal is to get them in there so they can get their IDs, start looking for work. Like I said,
Give an address.
Yeah. The tiny home community I was going to do was going to be like a work program for people on the streets that need to find a job. There's a lot of people out there that don't have drug and alcohol issues. I've got a lot of people say, I just need an address, I need a bed, I need an ID, and I will start looking for work. And if they go to the shelter, the problem with the shelter is you got to be there at 3 p.m. to check in, and you got to be up at 5:30 a.m. to leave. So if you get a job like at Taco Bell or something, I mean, you're not going to be able to go to the shelter, and you're going to be living on the streets, getting dirty. And so a lot of people need that opportunity. So that's what our tiny home was going to be. Once they got a job, they'd pay 30% into rent, 30% into savings, which they get back when they move out, and then they keep the rest.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.